Watch this.
Who's in? Who's out? It's been kind of a vague 24 hours when it comes to who is and who isn't running to be the governor of Idaho, and from which direction they might be running. We'll try to explain the lane assignments. After watching several school board shakeups, including with the board on which he once served, a former West Ada trustee is hoping to bring back decorum to discourse about public education. The Day of Remembrance is happening this weekend. One filmmaker wants you to remember the reason Japanese Americans were incarcerated during World War II wasn't the reason we were told. The past 24 hours or so have been quite eventful in the race to be Idaho's next governor. We've seen the current governor drop a campaign television ad without formally announcing he's running. We've seen another candidate drop out of the race for the Republican nomination, only to assure his supporters he is in fact still running. Ammon Bundy did officially make that announcement this morning after reports of it happening last night came from people inside his campaign. And there is another layer to this. Sources told KTVB Bundy would be stepping back to endorse Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeachin in her bid to be Idaho's next governor. However, this morning, Bundy made it clear that part wasn't true. He's not getting out of the race, just changing lanes. Joe Paris breaks down the last 24 hours that may have major implications in the May primary election.
A whirlwind of words ended up thinning down the field for the competitive May GOP primary for Idaho governor. It all started on the radio Wednesday evening when KBOI Radio's Nate Shellman said this.
Multiple sources say that Ammon Bundy, GOP, well, right now, current GOP candidate Ammon Bundy, will withdraw from the GOP primary and endorse Lieutenant Governor gubernatorial candidate Janice McGeachin.
Shellman went on to say that Bundy and McGeachin had reached an agreement to support each other.
If Janice wins the primary, Ammon drops out of the race completely. If Janice does not win the primary, Janice will endorse Ammon Bundy in the general election.
It would be a major development ahead of the May primary, two candidates formally working together in an effort to beat the incumbent, Governor Brad Little. A short time after Shellman's show, KTVB's Morgan Romero confirmed with the source within Bundy's campaign that the insight from the radio show was true. But Ammon Bundy himself would soon take to social media Wednesday night to say quite the contrary. He wrote on Twitter, quote, "Sounds like Nate Shellman made some serious assumptions on the air today. Not sure where he is getting his info from. Never did Janice and I make a deal to endorse each other." At that point, there was serious confusion. The Bundy campaign and Bundy himself were saying very different things. Thursday morning, he wrote in an extended statement about his supposed deal with McGeachin that, quote, "Although this is an intriguing idea, the fact of the matter is, Janice McGeachin and I never made any agreement to endorse each other. In the future, this radio host should think twice about running with information he gets from that source. His show yesterday was an exhibit of lazy and tabloid journalism." Bundy goes on to say that he will run for governor as an independent, saying in part, the Republican establishment in Idaho is full of filth and corruption, and they refuse to put forth the party platform. Bundy then listed a random collection of high-profile scandals and rumors pertaining to major Idaho GOP figures. Despite what Bundy said Thursday morning, campaign sources did tell us the original plan involved an endorsement deal with McGeachin. But plans change, right? McGeachin retweeted Bundy's statement, sharing the news with her followers. McGeachin then responded to Bundy with a statement of her own, saying, quote, "Today's announcement by Ammon Bundy that he is withdrawing from the Republican gubernatorial primary makes it all the more clear that there is only one viable conservative candidate in this race." A call and messages to the McGeachin campaign went unanswered, with no response immediately.
All right, Joe, so I guess all of this, what happened over the last 24 hours, just means that there is one less candidate for the Republican primary, but not necessarily for the race for governor.
Right, and I think there's some confusion today amongst the supporters of Mr. Bundy as well as people in the Republican Party. As we clarified there in the story, he's still very a part of the gubernatorial race. However, he'll only likely be on November ballot. Coming up on February 28th, that is the official start of when the candidates can actually file to run for office. That is the formal declaration that here's the paperwork. I'm running for office.
Right.
At that point, we're going to start to see a lot of Republicans officially join the race. Assumably, that's when we would see some technical official information from Governor Brad Little, but also people like Janice McGeachin, Ed Humphreys. A lot of people across the state of Idaho are going to be watching this GOP primary because we know more oftentimes than not the Republicans do win the statewide races. So that's why there is so much attention on the May primary. But Bundy will not be in that May primary. Likely, though, he will be on the ballot as an independent in November.
Meanwhile, on the other side, on the Democratic ticket, it's a lonely place right now.
So far, there's only, I guess, one or two names out there.
Has made their intentions known. Yeah.
Yes. So I guess, again, on February 28th, we'll start to get a list of names, and really 2 weeks after that, we'll figure out what the field is. But strap in, Brian. We're on our way to May.
All right. Well, thanks for setting the record straight, if in fact it is straight. If anybody can make sense of that, we kind of hope we tried.
It's a winding road.
It is. Thanks, Joe.
Yep.
All right, I don't know if you've noticed, but we haven't really talked about critical race theory on the show in a little bit. Mentioned it a few times this week. And considering we cover the State House considerably, that's pretty unique. But something came up on the legislative agenda this morning that caught our eye. Something that might be taking a chop at the proverbial CRT cherry tree. We think because, well, none of lawmakers have been actually able to accurately define CRT. Two Republicans, though, Senator Carl Crabtree of Grangeville and Representative Judy Boyle of Midvale, introduced a resolution that would, quote, encourage the schools of Idaho to provide children with the knowledge, strength, and virtue of a free people by viewing the history both clearly and wholly, not only the offenses, but also the triumphs. It is imperative that children are taught about mistakes as well as unprecedented accomplishments toward freedom and fairness for all, end quote. A declaration that is unnecessary, though, if you ask a teacher, because they say it's already happening.
Let's teach our children how to think and not what to think.
It's a quote, by the way, from Margaret Mead, who also tried to teach Americans that understanding the lives of other people could help them understand their own. And that included being a critic of sexual repression, hetero, homo, or otherwise, and that moms with careers and kids can go hand in hand. She talked about all that stuff, but I digress. There's a section of the resolution that claims that divisive content and critical race theory is being taught in the classrooms, something Senator Janie Ward Engelking took issue with during debate, and virtually every educator in Idaho would as well. But it wouldn't matter. It passed out of committee with a do-pass recommendation. So now the entire House gets to decide if teaching all of history to Idaho students is a good thing to resolve. Well, on the topic of what's happening in our schools, on Tuesday we told you about a pretty dismal statistic. We know of at least 11 school board trustees throughout districts in Idaho that have recently resigned, not wanting to deal with it anymore. 5 of those came from the state's largest district, West Ada, with Amy Johnson making that decision on Monday. We've seen the superintendent and another trustee in the Nampa School District do the same last week. Well, Johnson cited threats she and her family received from members of the West Ada community as her reason for leaving. The others claiming pretty much the same thing. Well, now a group called West Ada Voters for Education, or WAVE, is coming together to try to bring civility and nonpartisanship back to the conversations happening within the school district. These days, though, that may be easier said than done. Here's Katya Stepovic.
I think it has to go back to what the pandemic did to our community. And I think our community really, it took a hit. I mean, Idaho, ever since I got here 20 years ago, Idaho's been a really friendly, nice, kind community, and it's supported each other. And I think things have changed a little bit.
Ed Klopfenstein, former chairman of the West Ada School District, who abruptly resigned in October of 2020 after dealing with protests, heated meetings, and recall efforts, says the pandemic created a level of distrust between the district and the community.
Still, it's very demanding. And when you're trying to spend literally 20 hours a week on a position, plus also 40 or 50 hours in your job, plus also family, it burns you out.
And so far, the pandemic has burned out 5 board members.
Are you taken aback or surprised at all by the amount of trustees left from 2 years ago till now?
No, I wish I was, but it was just I don't know what makes West Ada unique, but it was a very, very, very difficult 2 years.
Which is now why he's co-founded a group called WAVE, West Ada Voters for Education, which is made up of about 50 West Ada parents, and it's growing.
What WAVE's trying to do is really focus back on the basics and realize that we want to be able to support nonpartisan, which is what the school board has always been about, pro-public education candidates and measures, and really talk about issues that surround the school district in a very civil way. We're not here to shout. We're here to be civil and to talk about the concerns of West Ada and our kids.
But how, in a time of heated debates and split opinions, do you have civil disagreements and discussions?
We all have our personal perspectives. And so I think if we came together, maybe pull back a wee bit and then come together as a community and try to have a more insight, a more civil insight, a more focus on kindness to each other, I think we'll get a lot more done, frankly.
How do you make a position like this, advertising when we're seeing what's been going on for years now?
I think people have to realize that those people on the board, they're community people. It's local, right? You're getting local people. You're not getting political experts. You're getting small business people. You're getting moms and dads. You're getting people who want to support their kids' education and they want to take a more active role.
And he hopes that WAVE makes that more clear for community members to see.
I think it all goes back to communication and how to communicate complex issues in a very difficult period. There is no training. We didn't have training for a pandemic, and we didn't have training for more intensive political situations. We just didn't. Like it or not, people who are leading that are democratically elected should lead, and you should provide them that support.
Now, during West Ada's special board meeting scheduled tomorrow at 9:30 a.m., they will accept Amy Johnson's resignation, and not long after that, the search will begin for another board member. Brian?
Katya, earlier this week when we did this story, we got a text message from a viewer who said, where are all these parents that show up at these board meetings now when it comes to volunteering in classrooms, when it comes to parent-teacher conferences? Suddenly they have a lot going on. So maybe something like this will get more parents involved and, as you said, in a right way.
Yeah, hopefully we can only hope.
All right, thanks, Katya. It was a dark time in American history, the rounding up of Japanese Americans from across the West, and several thousand being sent to an internment camp in Idaho. We were told it was an issue of national security. The truth says otherwise. We really love digging into Idaho history, so if you have a story to tell, or one you want us to look into, tell us about it. Shoot us a text, 208-321-5614. That's the same number you can send your comments and questions about today's stories, and yes, even your complaints. Just be sure to keep them clean, clever, and concise. Oh, and include your name and the hashtag #the208. There's an anniversary coming up this weekend that really isn't a cause for celebration. February 19th, 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which gave the U.S. Army the authority to remove Japanese American civilians from military zones along the West Coast, those areas that they thought were, well, I guess, close to being attacked. It certainly wasn't the first time the federal government had forcibly removed a collection of people from their homeland, but it was the last. Yet the practice of persecuting a marginalized group lives on today. This Saturday marks the Day of Remembrance, a day to remember this internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. But there's a documentary filmmaker who wants you to remember something else. He made a movie called Alternative Facts: The Lies of Executive Order 9066, and it'll be showing this weekend in southern Idaho for the first time. John Osaki wants you to remember anti-Asian sentiment in the United States began well before December 7th, 1941. The bombing of Pearl Harbor pushed public sentiment toward Japanese Americans to a level never seen before. 10 weeks later, on February 19, 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, authorizing the military to round up Japanese Americans and remove them from their homes along the West Coast. About 120,000 were sent to 10 different internment camps scattered from Arkansas to California. More than 9,000 were incarcerated in Idaho at the Minidoka Relocation Center.
The justification for the incarceration orders was that Japanese Americans were committing acts of espionage. The truth of the matter is that the military, through the help of the Federal Communications Commission, realized pretty quickly that none of that was true.
That truth, or the hiding of it, is the basis of a documentary by John Osaki, whose own parents were sent to an internment camp in Northern California. His father lived in San Francisco, a high schooler with a dog.
There was so much hatred directed towards Japanese following the bombing of Pearl Harbor that people considered his dog a Jap dog.
So when he was loaded onto a truck,
he literally had to sit there and watch his dog chase that truck for over a mile until it got too tired and it sat down in the middle of the road and he never saw it again.
Learning about
Alternative Facts tells the story of the false narrative that led to this American tragedy.
We had the intelligence, we had the information, we knew that Japanese Americans were not a threat to national security, but decided to incarcerate them anyways.
The documentary highlights not just the ethnic,
but then you see the Japanese get there and they start creating really productive farms,
but the economic reasons behind the executive order.
And there is a lot of fear that Japanese Americans are going to take over the Central Valley.
They seized this as an opportunity to essentially take over their land.
Does it shock you how easily and how successful it went over?
It doesn't shock me. I think what we've tried to do with this film is just draw a straight line to how that playbook is still very successful today.
Donald Trump defending himself tonight, even comparing himself to FDR.
And it's something that I think we have to be vigilant about, and that real people suffer severe consequences when they get pulled into this political agenda for really power, right? It's really about people acquiring power in this country and using marginalized communities to do that.
If you create fear and demonize an entire group, we saw what that led to. And we're starting to head in a very similar direction.
That's really the lesson of the incarceration of Japanese Americans in World War II. And I think we just have to constantly talk about that, and that a lot of our history in this country is not pretty. And I think we have to be willing to confront that, or we're not going to make progress in addressing this, this dynamic.
John made a deliberate decision to use young voices in his documentary to make sure that they understand the lessons of history and how they are connected to today. Now, this weekend will be the first time the film will be screened in Idaho, as we mentioned, and there are 2 chances for you to see it for free. The first on Sunday at the College of Southern Idaho in Twin Falls. The second on Monday at the Idaho State Museum in Boise. However, we just learned this afternoon they've reached capacity at that museum. You can get on a waiting list, but unless you've already made reservations for Monday, you might want to head to Twin Falls for Sunday's showing. Filmmaker John Osaki is scheduled to be there for a post-screening discussion about the lessons and legacy of Executive Order 9066. All right, final moments here of the show on this Thursday. And we get this question a lot sent in every time we kind of do some sort of political story, and it involves Ammon Bundy. Why do you keep giving Ammon Bundy any airtime whatsoever? He thrives on the attention and has spent his whole life seeking it. He's enjoying every minute of this, and he's a radical who deserves no publicity. It is getting old, says Derek. And while a lot of people can agree with you, Derek, there are things that have to do with Idaho politics that he's very much involved with that we kind of have to keep you updated on, especially over the last 24 hours, considering it's kind of changed the face of the Republican primary coming up in May. So it is kind of relevant to kind of bring this to you and let you know what's happening. But the infighting and stuff and all the attention seeking, there's a lot of people who agree with you about kind of laying off. But you might notice we don't do it on a daily basis. So there's that. School board changes should not be blamed on any pandemic. The issue is the cause of poorly disciplined people, says Larry. And that's what a lot of the board members are saying. It's not necessarily this pandemic, which came out of nowhere and caught a lot of people off guard, but the reaction to it from parents and those who attend some of these school boards and send threatening messages to said members. Thank you for the story about the Japanese Americans being rounded up, but when they found out they weren't a threat, I believe is what Bob is saying, they were immediately released. Although that's not the case. And that's the point of this documentary, is that they knew that before they even rounded them up, that they were not a threat, yet they still rounded them up, and they were imprisoned, well, basically up until 1945. So it lasted several years. It wasn't like the next week. Just a question, what about the German Americans that were put in concentration camps here in the USA? That's a fact. So were Italians, just they didn't have any of those places here in Idaho. We kind of like to focus on the 208 here, on the 208, which we'll do again tomorrow. We'll see you then.